You feel overwhelmed by daily pressures that seem to multiply endlessly, and every setback shakes your confidence to its core. The stress is affecting your sleep, your health, and your happiness outside of work, while you watch others maintain their composure under similar crushing responsibilities. I am Marcus Aurelius, who maintained inner peace while ruling the most powerful empire in history and bearing the weight of millions of lives. The discipline I mastered, the secret that sustained me through plagues, wars, and the burden of absolute power, will transform how you face any challenge life presents. What I discovered about true discipline isn't about forcing yourself through willpower alone. It's about building an unshakable fortress of the mind that no external pressure can penetrate. The same stoic principles that guided emperors can guide anyone facing modern chaos. But first, like this video, subscribe for more timeless wisdom, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready for transformation. I remember the exact moment my life changed forever. It was March 7th, 161 AD, and I was studying philosophy in my library when a messenger arrived with news that would crush my soul and reshape my destiny. Emperor Antoninus Pius, my adoptive father, was dead. The purple cloak of imperial office, that heavy, magnificent burden, was now mine. I had always known this day would come, yet nothing could have prepared me for the crushing weight of absolute responsibility. As they draped the purple cloak across my shoulders, I felt the fabric's true heaviness. It wasn't just silk and gold thread. It was the weight of 60 million souls across the empire, all looking to me for guidance, protection, and wisdom. That first night as emperor, I barely slept. I walked through the palace corridors, feeling like an imposter wearing borrowed clothes. The purple cloak hung in my chambers like a living thing, watching me, judging me, reminding me that every decision I made would ripple across the known world. The pressures came immediately. Border wars demanded my attention. Senators plotted and schemed, testing the new emperor's resolve. Plagues threatened our cities. Trade disputes required Solomon-like wisdom. Citizens petitioned for justice, mercy, grain, protection. Each problem felt like a stone added to an already impossible load. I remember standing on my private balcony that second dawn, looking out over Rome and feeling completely overwhelmed. The city stretched endlessly before my millions of people, waking up, beginning their days, trusting that their emperor would keep them safe, fed, and free. The responsibility was suffocating. That's when I realized something crucial. External pressures would either forge me into the leader Rome needed, or they would break me completely. There was no middle ground for an emperor. I could either master myself and find inner strength, or I would crumble under the weight of the purple cloak and fail everyone depending on me. Asterisk, asterisk. Those first weeks as emperor nearly destroyed me. I was drowning in decisions, suffocating under pressure, and spiraling toward a complete breakdown when I remembered something my teacher, Junius Rusticus, had given me years earlier. A worn scroll containing the teachings of Epictetus, a former slave who had become the greatest philosopher of his generation. I had studied philosophy as an intellectual exercise before becoming emperor. It was something educated Romans did. We read Plato, discussed Aristotle, and debated ethics over wine. But suddenly, with the weight of empire crushing down on me, philosophy became a matter of survival. That scroll of Epictetus became my lifeline. His words weren't just beautiful theories. They were practical tools forged in the crucible of real suffering. Here was a man who had been enslaved, beaten, and broken, yet had discovered unshakable inner freedom. If a slave could find peace in chains, surely an emperor could find peace on a throne. I remember the exact passage that saved me from complete despair. You are not your circumstances. You are your responses to your circumstances. Reading those words was like being struck by lightning. I realized I had been focusing entirely on external pressures, the wars, the plagues, the political intrigues, when the real battle was happening inside my own mind. Epictetus taught me that there are only two kinds of things in this world: things you can control and things you cannot control. The weather, other people's actions, the past, the future, death itself, these are beyond your influence. But your thoughts, your reactions, your choices, your character, these belong entirely to you. This wasn't just academic philosophy anymore. This was the difference between sanity and madness, between effective leadership and catastrophic failure. I began applying these principles immediately, not in quiet contemplation, but in the midst of imperial chaos, when senators challenged my authority. Instead of reacting with anger, I would pause and ask, what part of this situation can I actually control? When border tribes threatened invasion, instead of panicking about outcomes I couldn't guarantee, I focused on making the best decisions with available information. Stoicism became my anchor in the storm of imperial responsibility. It taught me that external events have no power over your inner peace unless you give them that power. The purple cloak was still heavy, but I was learning to carry its weight with dignity rather than being crushed beneath it. The real breakthrough came when I understood what Epictetus meant by the inner citadel, that impregnable fortress of the mind that no external force can ever breach. I began building mine systematically, stone by stone, through daily practice and relentless self-examination. Every morning before dawn, I would retreat to my private meditation chamber. There was nothing grand about it, just a simple stone bench, worn smooth by years of use, a small window facing east, and silence. This became my sacred space, where I would sit and construct the fortress of my mind. The inner citadel isn't a place of hiding or escape. It's a place of unshakable strength, from which you engage with the world. Think of it as the command center of your soul, where you retreat not to avoid challenges, but to face them with clarity and wisdom. I learned to separate my essential self from the chaos swirling around me. Marcus Aurelius, the man, my thoughts, my character, my values existed independently from Marcus Aurelius, the emperor, with all his external pressures and responsibilities. The emperor might face impossible decisions and crushing setbacks, but the man inside the citadel remained untouchable. The key to building this fortress is understanding the fundamental distinction between what belongs to you and what doesn't. Your reputation doesn't belong to you. Other people create and control it. Your health doesn't fully belong to you. Disease and aging follow their own laws. Even your life doesn't belong to you. Death comes when it comes, but your thoughts, completely yours. Your character, entirely under your control. Your responses to events, absolutely your domain. Your commitment to virtue, no one can touch it. These are the materials from which you build your inner citadel. I would sit on that stone bench each morning and practice what I called separation exercises. When faced with any challenge, I would mentally divide it into two categories: what I could influence and what I could not. Then I would pour all my energy into the first category while accepting the second. With perfect equanimity. This wasn't passive resignation, it was strategic focus. By releasing attachment to outcomes beyond my control, I freed up enormous mental energy to influence the things I actually could change. The citadel became my source of power, not my prison. Once you build this fortress properly, nothing can disturb your essential peace. Armies can march against your borders, senators can plot your downfall, plagues can ravage your cities, but inside the citadel, you remain unshaken, clear-minded, and ready to respond with wisdom rather than react with emotion. Asterisk, the most powerful discovery of my reign was this: we don't suffer from events themselves, but from our judgments about those events. Every morning in my meditation chamber, I kept a cracked bronze mirror that showed my reflection with imperfections. It reminded me daily that perception shapes reality more than reality shapes perception. Most people live as prisoners of their own interpretations. They encounter a setback and immediately label it a disaster. They face criticism and automatically judge it as humiliation. They experience delay and instantly categorize it as failure. But these labels aren't facts there. Choices can be changed. I learned to practice what I call perspective discipline, the systematic reframing of every situation to reveal its hidden opportunities and lessons. When the Antonine Plague swept through Rome, killing thousands daily, my initial reaction was horror and despair. But through disciplined perception, I began to see it differently. This plague became my greatest teacher in leadership under pressure. It forced me to make decisions with incomplete information, to comfort people facing their deepest fears, to find courage when I felt terrified myself. The plague wasn't just a catastrophe, it was a crucible that forged my character and revealed my true capabilities as a leader. The technique I developed is simple but transformative. Whenever you encounter any situation, immediately ask yourself 3 questions. What can this teach me? How can this make me stronger? And what opportunity is hidden within this challenge? This isn't naive optimism, it's strategic wisdom. I remember when barbarian tribes invaded our northern borders while I was dealing with political rebellion in the east. My advisors saw only catastrophe enemies on 2 fronts: impossible logistics, certain defeat. But through disciplined perception, I saw something different, an opportunity to unite our divided military forces against common threats and to demonstrate Roman resilience to our allies. The invasion became the catalyst for our greatest military reorganization and ultimately strengthened our borders for generations. What looked like disaster became victory through the simple act of changing how I perceived the situation. This discipline of perception extends to every aspect of life. When people criticize your decisions, instead of seeing attacks on your character, you can see opportunities to refine your thinking. When projects fail, instead of experiencing personal defeat, you can gather valuable data for future success. When relationships end, instead of viewing it as rejection, you can see space for growth and new connections. The cracked mirror in my chamber taught me that even imperfections serve a purpose. They remind us that nothing in this world is perfect. And that's exactly what makes growth possible. Perfect things cannot improve. Only flawed things can be refined. Master this discipline, and you become virtually unstoppable. External circumstances lose their power to control your inner state. You begin to see challenges as training, setbacks as redirection, and failures as education. The same events that break others become the very experiences that forge your strength. The most important hour of my day was the hour before the world could touch me. Every morning, guided by the dawn sundial in my private chambers, I would wake before the first servants stirred and claim this sacred time for building unshakable inner strength. Most people begin their days reactively checking messages, responding to urgent demands, letting external forces set their emotional tone. But I learned that how you begin your day determines everything that follows. The morning is when you either take control of your mind or surrender it to circumstance. My 4-step morning discipline became the foundation of my imperial strength. First, I would spend 10 minutes in gratitude practice, not for the obvious blessings of wealth and power, but for the challenges that would make me stronger. I gave thanks for difficult senators who would test my patience, for complex decisions that would develop my wisdom, for responsibilities that would forge my character. Second, I practiced what I called daily death meditation. This wasn't morbid, dwelling on mortality, but a practical exercise in perspective. I would remind myself that this could be my last day, that nothing in this world is permanent, that every moment is borrowed time. This practice eliminated petty concerns and focused my attention on what truly mattered. Third, I would mentally rehearse the day ahead, but with a crucial twist. Instead of planning what I hoped would happen, I prepared for what could go wrong. I would visualize setbacks, criticisms, delays, and failures, then practice my responses. By the time real challenges arrived, I had already faced them in my mind and chosen my reactions carefully. Fourth, I would recite my fundamental principles, the core values that would guide every decision, regardless of external pressure. Justice above convenience, truth above popularity, duty above personal desire, virtue above all worldly success. These weren't just pretty words. They were marching orders for my soul. This morning, discipline transformed everything. When crises they erupted daily. I wasn't caught off guard emotionally. I had already centered myself, clarified my values, and prepared my mind for whatever the day might bring. While others reacted in panic or anger, I responded from a place of inner stability. The dawn sundial became my sacred timekeeper, marking the boundary between the preparation time that belonged to me alone and the public time that belonged to the empire. Those quiet morning minutes created an invisible shield that protected my inner peace throughout even the most chaotic days. I discovered that you cannot give others strength you don't possess yourself. You cannot lead with wisdom you haven't cultivated. You cannot inspire confidence if you're internally scattered. The morning hour of discipline became the wellspring from which all my imperial effectiveness flowed. This practice required fierce protection. No emergency was urgent enough to skip it, no meeting important enough to cut it short. The empire could wait 1 hour each day while the emperor prepared his mind to serve it properly. Asterisk, asterisk, I carried a small amber stone in my pocket, polished smooth by anxious fingers during my early reign when emotions threatened to overwhelm my judgment. That worry stone became my teacher in emotional mastery, reminding me that feelings are temporary visitors, not permanent residents of the mind. The greatest challenge of leadership isn't managing other people, it's managing yourself. In my first year as emperor, I was a slave to my emotions. Anger would flare when senators opposed my policies. Fear would paralyze me when facing military threats. Frustration would cloud my thinking when solutions weren't immediately apparent. I was like a ship without an anchor, tossed by every emotional wave. The breakthrough came when I learned to observe my emotions rather than be controlled by them. Instead of saying, "I am angry," I began saying, "I notice anger arising in me." This subtle shift created crucial space between myself and my feelings. Anger became something I experienced, not something I was. I developed a technique I called the Emperor's Pause. Whenever I felt strong emotions beginning to surge, I would touch that amber stone in my pocket and take 3 deliberate breaths. In that pause, I would ask myself, is this emotion serving my highest purpose right now? Usually, the answer was no. Anger, I discovered, is almost always about trying to control things beyond your influence. When someone disrespects you, challenges your authority, or fails to meet your expectations, anger arises because you're demanding that reality be different than it is. But reality doesn't negotiate with your preferences. I remember a particular Senate meeting where a senator publicly accused me of weakness for not launching immediate war against the Germanic tribes. My initial response was burning rage. How dare he question my judgment in front of the entire assembly? But I touched the stone, took my pause, and chose a different response. Instead of defending myself with anger, I asked him questions. What specific outcomes do you believe immediate war would achieve? What are the potential costs in Roman lives? How would you address the logistical challenges of winter campaigns? Within minutes, his accusation crumbled under the weight of his own unprepared thinking, and I had maintained dignity while exposing his hollownness. Fear required different medicine. I learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's action in the presence of fear. When plague threatened Rome, I was terrified of making wrong decisions that could cost thousands of lives. But I couldn't let fear paralyze me into inaction. I developed what I called fear alchemy, transforming fear into fuel for better preparation. When afraid of making wrong decisions, I gathered more information. When worried about unknown outcomes, I created contingency plans. When anxious about public criticism, I focused on doing what was right, regardless of popular opinion. The Amber Stone taught me that emotions are like weather, they arise, they peak, and they pass. Your job isn't to prevent emotional storms, but to remain steady while they move through you. You can acknowledge fear without being paralyzed by it. You can notice anger without being controlled by it. You can experience sadness without drowning in it. Emotional mastery became my secret weapon as emperor. While others made decisions from reactive emotional states, I made choices from centered clarity. This gave me enormous advantages in negotiations, crisis management, and long-term strategic thinking. People began to trust my judgment because they could see I wasn't driven by impulse or passion, but by reasoned wisdom. The ivory gavel of the Roman Senate witnessed countless betrayals, manipulations, and power plays during my reign. Leading an empire means dealing with the most difficult people imaginable: senators who plot against you, generals who question your orders, citizens who blame you for every misfortune, and foreign leaders who see you as an obstacle to their ambitions. I learned that difficult people are actually your greatest teachers in discipline. They force you to practice virtues under pressure, to maintain your principles when it would be easier to abandon them, and to respond with wisdom when every instinct screams for revenge. The first principle of dealing with impossible people is this: their behavior tells you everything about them and nothing about you. When Senator Cassius spread rumors about my fitness to rule, my initial instinct was to take it personally, but I realized his attacks revealed his character, not mine. He was a man so insecure about his own position that he could only feel important. By diminishing others, I developed a practice I called perspective flipping. Instead of seeing difficult people as enemies to defeat, I began seeing them as opportunities to strengthen my own character. Every unreasonable demand became a chance to practice patience. Every personal attack became an opportunity to demonstrate dignity. Every betrayal became a test of my commitment to justice over revenge. The second principle is understanding that difficult people are usually suffering people. Those who hurt others are typically struggling with their own pain, fear, or insecurity. This doesn't excuse their behavior, but it helps you respond with wisdom rather than emotion. Senator Antonius constantly interrupted council meetings with irrelevant objections and personal grievances. Rather than viewing him as a deliberate saboteur, I recognized a man desperate to feel heard and valued. I began asking for his input on issues within his expertise and acknowledging his contributions publicly. His disruptive behavior diminished dramatically once he felt respected. The third principle is maintaining your own center regardless of their chaos. Difficult people often try to pull you into their emotional state. They want you angry, frustrated, or defensive, because then they can control the interaction. But if you remain calm and centered, you maintain power over the situation. I remember a heated argument with Germanic tribal leaders during peace negotiations. They shouted, threatened, and insulted Roman honor, clearly trying to provoke me into angry responses that would justify their walking away from talks. Instead, I remained perfectly calm, acknowledged their concerns, and continued focusing on solutions. Their fury eventually exhausted itself against my steady presence, and we reached a favorable agreement. The fourth principle is never taking their attacks personally. even when they're clearly personal. People who attack your character, your decisions, or your worth are really attacking their own projections and fears. They're fighting battles with themselves, and you just happened to be a convenient target. When citizens blamed me for the plague sweeping through Rome, calling me cursed by the gods, I could have been devastated by their accusations. Instead, I understood they were desperate people looking for someone to blame for their suffering. Their anger wasn't really about it was about their helplessness in the face of forces beyond anyone's control. The final principle is that your character is built through how you treat people who can do nothing for you and who sometimes work against you. It's easy to be kind to allies and supporters. True character emerges in how you respond to enemies and critics. I chose to treat even my harshest critics with dignity and fairness. Some thought this was weakness, but I knew it was strength. By maintaining my principles, regardless of how others behaved, I built unshakable integrity that no external force could corrupt. Difficult people become your allies in character development. Once you understand how to use their challenges as training for your own growth. The bone scalpel sits before me as I write this, a physician's instrument from the darkest period of my reign, when the Antonine Plague swept through our empire. Like divine punishment, that simple tool represents the thousands of life and death decisions I made with disciplined clarity, while watching my world crumble around me. The plague arrived in 165 AD, with returning legions from the east, spreading faster than wildfire through our interconnected empire. Within months, bodies filled the streets of Rome faster than we could burn them. Citizens fled the cities, abandoning their duties. Government collapsed in many provinces. Some estimated that 1/3 of our population would die in the first weeks. I nearly broke under the pressure. How do you lead when there are no good options? How do you make decisions when every choice leads to suffering? How do you maintain hope when death surrounds you daily? This was discipline tested in the crucible of ultimate responsibility. I lost my wife Faustina during these years, not to plague, but to complications that might have been treatable if physicians hadn't been overwhelmed with dying masses. I held her hand as she died, whispering the stoic principles that had sustained us both. What is not good for the swarm cannot be good for the bee, I told her, meaning her individual suffering was part of some larger pattern I couldn't yet understand. Grief threatened to shatter my resolve completely. I wanted to rage against the gods, to abandon my duties, to hide in my chambers and mourn in private. But 60 million people depended on me to remain strong, to make impossible decisions with steady hands, to provide leadership when everything felt hopeless. The discipline I had built through mourning practices and emotional mastery became my lifeline. Each dawn, I would rise and remind myself that this plague was testing not just our empire's resilience, but my character. Would I lead with wisdom during our darkest hour, or would I crumble when my people needed me most? I made decisions that still haunt me. I ordered entire districts quarantined, knowing many healthy people would die trapped with the infected. I redirected grain shipments from starving provinces to areas where I calculated we could save more lives. I authorized physicians to experiment with unproven treatments because conventional medicine had failed utterly. Each decision required perfect emotional discipline. I couldn't afford to be paralyzed by compassion or driven by desperate optimism. I had to see clearly, calculate objectively, and act decisively even when every option involved tragic costs. The plague taught me that external chaos demands internal order. When everything around you is falling apart, your inner citadel becomes the only stable foundation for effective action. People need leaders who can think clearly when everyone else is panicking, who can make hard choices when emotions are running high, who can maintain hope without ignoring harsh realities. I learned to compartmentalize my personal grief while maintaining my public responsibilities. In private moments, I would mourn my losses and feel the full weight of suffering around me. But when duty called, I would step into my role as emperor with complete focus and unwavering determination. The discipline of accepting what I couldn't control became absolutely crucial. I couldn't stop the plague, couldn't bring back the dead, couldn't eliminate the suffering, but I could organize relief efforts, maintain civic order, preserve hope, and demonstrate that leadership means staying present during the worst of times. By the plague's end, approximately 5 million Romans had died. But our empire survived because discipline held when everything else failed. The practices I had built during peaceful times became the foundation that sustained me through unimaginable crisis. That bone scalpel reminds me that sometimes discipline means cutting away what's infected to save what's healthy. Sometimes it means making cuts that cause immediate pain to prevent greater suffering. Sometimes it means operating with steady hands when your heart is breaking. Crisis reveals character. The discipline you build during calm moments determines whether you'll stand or collapse when storms arrive. Asterisk, asterisk, my dented battle helmet sits in my private armory, scarred but intact. Like the philosophy that sustained me through 8 years of Germanic campaigns, that helmet protected my skull from barbarian axes, but stoic discipline protected my soul from the moral corruption that war threatens to bring. People imagine emperors commanding armies from comfortable distance, but I led from the front lines. I slept in tents with my soldiers, shared their rations during sieges, and felt enemy spears whistle past my ears. War strips away all pretense and reveals what you're truly made of when death surrounds you daily. The first battle tested everything I believed about virtue and necessity. Standing in formation as Germanic warriors charged our lines, I faced a terrible reality. I would have to take lives to save lives, kill to prevent greater killing, bring death to preserve peace. How do you maintain your humanity while performing inhuman acts? The answer came through disciplined thinking about the nature of duty. I wasn't killing for glory, conquest, or personal gain. I was protecting Roman citizens who depended on our legions for their survival. Every barbarian warrior who died in battle was one less threat to the farmers, merchants, and families living peacefully within our borders. This distinction became crucial for my mental preparation before each campaign. I would spend hours in meditation, clarifying my intentions and purifying my motivations. Was I fighting from anger or from duty, from pride or from protection, from personal ambition or from service to something greater than myself? I developed rituals that maintained my philosophical center even in the chaos of combat. Each morning before battle, I would recite the same prayer. Grant me courage to do what duty requires, wisdom to minimize unnecessary suffering, and strength to bear the weight of necessary decisions. This wasn't asking the gods for victory, was preparing my soul for righteous action. The warrior's mind requires a paradox. You must become comfortable with violence, while never losing your horror of it. The moment you begin enjoying destruction, you've become the very thing you're fighting against. I watched good men become monsters because they couldn't maintain this balance. I remember one particular siege, where our forces could have breached the enemy's walls and slaughtered every defender. My generals argued for total destruction as an example to other tribes, but I chose a longer siege that eventually forced surrender with minimal casualties. Some called this weakness, but I knew it was strength and discipline to choose the harder path that preserved more life. The most difficult aspect of war, leadership, was watching young soldiers die under my command. These weren't abstract statistics, they were boys from Roman farms and cities who trusted me with their lives. Each death felt personal, and grief threatened to paralyze my decision-making. I learned to honor their sacrifice by making sure that deaths served a worthy purpose. Every tactical decision had to justify the price we were paying. Every strategic choice had to measure human costs against achievable objectives. This wasn't cold calculation, it was sacred responsibility. The battlefield became my laboratory for testing Stoic principles under ultimate pressure. Could I maintain inner peace while surrounded by screaming chaos? Could I make rational decisions when exhausted, afraid, and covered in blood? Could I stay true to my values when survival seemed to require abandoning them? War taught me that. Courage isn't fearlessness, it's action despite fear. Every time I led a charge or made a stand, I was terrified. But discipline meant doing what duty required, regardless of my emotional state. My soldiers needed to see their emperor standing firm, not because I felt no fear, but because I chose duty over comfort. The Germanic campaigns lasted 8 brutal years. We secured our borders, protected our citizens, and demonstrated Roman resolve to potential enemies. But the real victory was maintaining my humanity throughout the carnage. I emerged from those wars still committed to justice, mercy, and virtue. That scarred helmet reminds me that true warriors fight for peace, not glory. They use violence only when necessary, with heavy hearts but steady hands. They carry the weight of their actions with dignity and never forget that their highest duty is to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The warrior's mind achieves its greatest triumph not in conquest, but in knowing when to sheath the sword. Asterisk, asterisk. The unfinished letter to my co-emperor Lucius Verus sits on my desk. Ink dried mid-sentence, capturing a moment when personal desire warred with public responsibility. I had been writing about my longing to return to philosophical study, to abandon the burdens of rule for the quiet contemplation I truly craved. But I never finished that letter, because duty demanded I stay. This is perhaps the hardest discipline of all, choosing what's right over what's easy, what serves others over what serves yourself, what the role demands over what the person wants. Every day as emperor, I faced this fundamental choice. Would I do what Marcus Aurelius, the man, desired, or what the empire required of its leader? The tension was constant and painful. I wanted to spend my days reading philosophy, writing in my journal, and engaging in thoughtful discussions with fellow students of wisdom. Instead, I spent them arbitrating trade disputes, reviewing military logistics, and listening to endless petitions from citizens seeking imperial favor. I wanted to travel the world as a private scholar, exploring different cultures and philosophical traditions. Instead, I traveled as an emperor, surrounded by guards and ceremony, never able to experience anything authentically because my presence changed everything around me. I wanted to raise my children personally, to teach them philosophy and watch them develop their own understanding of virtue. Instead, imperial duties kept me away for months at a time, fighting wars on distant frontiers, while they grew up in my absence. The discipline of duty meant accepting that my personal happiness was subordinate to my public service. This wasn't martyrdom or self-sacrifice, was the logical consequence of accepting power. The moment you take responsibility for others, your own desires become secondary considerations. I developed a practice I called role clarity. Each morning, I would remind myself that I was not primarily Marcus the individual, but Marcus the emperor. The individual might want comfort, leisure, and personal fulfillment, but the emperor had obligations that transcended personal preferences. This clarity eliminated most internal conflicts about what to do in difficult situations. When senators requested meetings that interfered with my study time, the emperor's duty was clear: serve the needs of governance. When military crises arose during family celebrations, the emperor's priority was obvious: protect the empire's security. The hardest test came when my son Commodus began showing signs of the corruption and instability that would later destroy much of what I had built. Every fatherly instinct wanted to protect him, to cover his mistakes, to use imperial power to shield him from consequences. But duty demanded that I prepare the empire for capable leadership, not indulge parental favoritism. I chose to address his failings honestly rather than enable them, to insist on competence rather than accept mediocrity, to think about Rome's future rather than protect my family's comfort. This decision tormented me personally, but was clearly right for the empire. The discipline of duty also meant making decisions that were unpopular but necessary. When grain shortages threatened Rome, I imposed rationing that affected even wealthy citizens. When provincial governors requested additional troops, I had to balance their needs against overall strategic requirements. When friends sought special favors, I had to choose justice over loyalty. Each choice reinforced a fundamental principle: your personal relationships, preferences, and comfort are not valid reasons for abandoning your responsibilities to those who depend on you. The moment you start making exceptions for yourself, you begin the corruption that destroys effective leadership. I found strength in remembering that duty is not a burden imposed from outside, it's a commitment you make to something greater than yourself. I had chosen to accept the purple cloak and everything it represented. Complaining about its weight would be like a soldier complaining about the weight of his armor while choosing to remain in battle. The unfinished letter reminds me that we all have moments when we want to escape our responsibilities, when personal desires feel more compelling than public duties. But character is built in these moments of choice. When you decide whether you'll be governed by what you want or by what's required of you. Asterisk, asterisk. The small carved skull on my desk is worn smooth by countless touches, my daily reminder that death is not the enemy of life, but its greatest teacher. Most people avoid thinking about mortality, but I made it central to my discipline because nothing clarifies priorities like remembering that your time here is borrowed and limited. Every morning, before I addressed the day's imperial business, I would hold that memento mori and contemplate the truth it represented. This could be my last day. The letters I would write, the decisions I would make, the words I would speak, all might be my final contributions to the world. How would I want to be remembered? This wasn't morbid dwelling on death, but practical preparation for living. When you truly accept that death could come at any moment, you stop wasting time on petty concerns, meaningless conflicts, and trivial pursuits. You focus on what actually matters: virtue, service, love, and the legacy you'll leave behind. I watched the plague take thousands of Romans, including many I loved. I saw young soldiers die in Germanic battles, their lives cut short by enemy spears. I felt my own body aging and weakening as the years passed. Death wasn't an abstract concept, was an ever-present reality that shaped every conscious moment. The fear of death, I realized, is really the fear of wasted life. People aren't truly afraid of dying. They're terrified of reaching the end and realizing they never really lived. They spent their days pursuing status, accumulating possessions, seeking approval, and avoiding discomfort, only to discover that none of it mattered when the final hour arrived. But when you live with death as your advisor, every day becomes precious. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to connect authentically. Every decision becomes a chance to choose virtue over convenience. Every moment becomes a gift to be used wisely rather than squandered carelessly. I developed what I called death rehearsal, a daily practice of imagining my own final moments and working backward to the present. What would I regret not doing? What would I wish I had said? What principles would I want to have lived by? How would I want people to remember my character? This practice transformed my leadership style completely. I stopped making decisions based on short-term political advantage and started thinking about long-term historical judgment. I stopped worrying about criticism from contemporaries and started focusing on whether future generations would consider my choices wise and just. The meditation on death also freed me from the tyranny of others' opinions. When you remember that both you and your critics will be dust within a century, their approval or disapproval loses its power to control your actions. You begin living for timeless principles rather than temporary popularity. I remember a particular Senate meeting where politicians were attacking my military spending. My initial reaction was defensive, anger. How dare they question my judgment? But then I touched the skull on my desk and asked myself, will this argument matter to anyone in 50 years? Will future Romans care about these political squabbles? Or will they judge me on whether I protected the empire effectively? The perspective shift was immediate and liberating. Instead of defending my ego, I explained my strategic reasoning calmly and factually. Instead of taking their criticism personally, I focused on making the best decisions for Rome's long-term security. The political noise became irrelevant when measured against historical importance. Death also taught me the value of preparation. Just as a wise general prepares for battle, a wise person prepares for death. This doesn't mean becoming obsessed with dying, but making sure your affairs are in order, your relationships are right, and your conscience is clear. I wrote extensively in my personal journals, not for publication, but to clarify my thinking and preserve lessons I had learned. I tried to resolve conflicts quickly rather than letting resentments fester. I expressed love and appreciation to people while they could still hear it. I worked to leave institutions stronger than I found them. The skull reminds me that death is the great equalizer. Emperor and slave, rich and poor, famous and unknown, we all face the same final journey. This knowledge breeds humility and compassion. The person annoying you today will be gone tomorrow, just as you will be. Why waste precious time on anger when you could choose understanding? Most importantly, contemplating death revealed the immortal part of human existence, the influence we have on others. My body will decay, but the principles I model, the love I share, the justice I uphold, and the wisdom I pass on will continue shaping the world long after I'm gone. Death is not life's opposite, it's life's teacher, showing you what matters and what doesn't, what lasts and what fades, what's worth pursuing and what's mere distraction. Asterisk, asterisk, the plain wooden cup from which I drink my morning water sits beside golden chalices that could feed a family for years. I choose the wooden cup deliberately, as a daily practice in the discipline of simplicity, the understanding that luxury weakens the soul, while voluntary restraint strengthens it. Most people believe that wealth and power should bring comfort and indulgence. They imagine that success means surrounding yourself with the finest things, the most elaborate pleasures, the greatest physical ease. But I discovered that the opposite is true. The more you have, the more you need to practice voluntary discomfort to maintain your strength of character. When you become accustomed to luxury, you become dependent on it. Your happiness begins to rely on external conditions remaining favorable. You lose the resilience that comes from knowing you can be content with less. You become soft, weak, and vulnerable to any disruption of your comfortable circumstances. Made it a practice to regularly sleep on hard floors instead of my imperial bed, to eat simple bread instead of elaborate feasts, to walk instead of being carried in litters. This wasn't self-punishment. I was training myself to remain happy and effective regardless of external conditions. The discipline of simplicity extends far beyond material possessions. It applies to your thoughts, your relationships, your commitments, and your desires. Complexity in any area of life creates vulnerability and weakness. Simplicity creates strength and freedom. I learn to simplify my thinking by focusing on fundamental principles rather than getting lost in elaborate philosophies. Justice, courage, wisdom, and temperance, these four virtues could guide any decision I faced as emperor. I didn't need complex ethical frameworks when I had these simple, powerful guidelines. I simplified my relationships by being direct and honest rather than playing political games. Instead of manipulating people through flattery or deception, I told them the truth and trusted their ability to handle it. This created deeper, more reliable connections than any amount of scheming could achieve. I simplified my daily schedule by eliminating activities that didn't serve essential purposes, ceremonial functions that existed only for tradition, meetings that could be handled through correspondence, social obligations that served no real purpose. Ruthlessly cut these from my calendar to focus on meaningful work. The practice of voluntary discomfort became especially important during times of abundance, when the empire was prosperous and secure, when my personal life was comfortable, when everything seemed to be going well. These were precisely the times I needed to practice simplicity most rigorously. I would deliberately choose the harder path when easier options were available. I would walk to meetings I could ride to, wear simple clothes when elaborate ones were expected, eat plain food when delicacies were offered. Each choice strengthened my independence from external conditions. This discipline proved invaluable during the plague years and Germanic campaigns. While others struggled with the transition from comfort to hardship, I was already accustomed to voluntary austerity. The loss of luxury didn't weaken me because I had never allowed myself to depend on it for happiness. I watched wealthy Romans collapse emotionally when forced to live simply during wartime rationing. They had become so dependent on elaborate food, fine clothing, and comfortable surroundings that they couldn't function effectively when these things were unavailable. Their luxury had become their prison. The wooden cup represents a crucial insight. True wealth is needing less, not having more. The person who can be content with simple food, basic shelter, and essential clothing is richer than someone who needs constant luxury to feel satisfied. They have achieved independence from external circumstances. This doesn't mean rejecting all pleasure or beauty. It means not depending on them for your essential well-being. I could appreciate fine art, enjoy good food, and value beautiful objects without needing them for happiness. They became enhancements to life rather than requirements for it. The discipline of simplicity also applied to my goals and ambitions. Instead of pursuing multiple complex objectives, I focused on a few essential ones: protecting the empire, governing justly, and living virtuously. This clarity of purpose eliminated confusion and allowed me to channel my energy effectively. I practiced what I called luxury fasting periods, where I deliberately avoided any comfort beyond basic necessities. During these times, I would discover how little I actually needed to be content and effective. The experience was always liberating and strengthening. The ultimate goal of simplicity isn't deprivation, it's freedom. When you can be happy with less, you become free from the fear of losing what you have. When you can function effectively without luxury, you become independent of changing circumstances. When you find contentment in basics, you become virtually unstoppable. That wooden cup reminds me daily that emperors must practice voluntary, voluntary poverty to maintain the strength necessary for effective leadership. The moment you become dependent on luxury for happiness, you become dependent on maintaining favorable conditions, and conditions always change. Asterisk. The iron weights in my private gymnasium are worn smooth by daily use, not just for strengthening my body, but as reminders that the mind, like muscle, grows strong only through consistent resistance training. Most people understand the need to exercise their bodies, but neglect the systematic training their minds require to develop unshakable discipline. I discovered that mental strength follows the same principles as physical strength: consistent practice, progressive challenges, and deliberate discomfort. Just as you can't build powerful muscles by lifting light weights occasionally, you can't build mental resilience by avoiding difficulties or practicing discipline only when it's convenient. My daily mental training routine became as structured and non-negotiable as a gladiator's physical preparation. Each morning, I would perform specific exercises designed to strengthen different aspects of mental discipline, attention control, emotional regulation, perspective shifting, and virtue. Practice. The first exercise was attention training. For 10 minutes each morning, I would focus exclusively on a single object, usually the flame of an oil lamp. Whenever my mind wandered to imperial concerns, personal worries, or random thoughts, I would gently redirect my attention back to the flame. This simple practice developed the mental muscle of sustained focus. Most people's minds are like untrained animals, jumping from thought to thought without direction or purpose. They react to every distraction, follow every emotional impulse, and wonder why they feel scattered and ineffective. But attention is a skill that can be developed through practice. Just like any physical ability, the second exercise was emotional resistance training. I would deliberately recall situations that had triggered anger, fear, or frustration, then practice maintaining inner calm while mentally rehearsing different responses. This wasn't suppressing emotions. It was building the strength to choose my reactions rather than being controlled by automatic patterns. I would visualize senators attacking my policies and practice responding with curiosity rather than defensiveness. I would imagine military setbacks and rehearse maintaining clarity instead of panic. I would recall personal losses and strengthen my ability to feel grief without being paralyzed by it. The third exercise was perspective training. I would take any current challenge and practice viewing it from multiple angles. How would this look from a century in the future? How would different philosophers approach this problem? What would someone who loved me advise? What opportunity might be hidden within this difficulty? This exercise built mental flexibility, the ability to shift perspectives quickly when default viewpoints weren't serving me well. Like a warrior training with different weapons, I was developing multiple ways to approach any situation mentally. The fourth exercise was virtue practice. I would identify specific situations where I could practice courage, justice, wisdom, or temperance that day, then mentally rehearse the virtuous response. If I knew I would face a difficult conversation, I would practice responding with honesty and compassion. If I anticipated political pressure, I would rehearse choosing principle over popularity. The key to all these exercises was progressive difficulty. Just as physical training becomes effective only when you continuously challenge yourself with heavier weights or longer distances, mental training requires steadily increasing the difficulty of your practice. I started with small challenges, maintaining focus for short periods, staying calm during minor irritations, shifting perspective on trivial problems. But gradually, I increased the intensity, focusing for longer periods, maintaining equanimity during major crises, finding opportunity within devastating setbacks. The compound effect of this daily training was remarkable. What had once required enormous effort staying calm under pressure, maintaining focus during chaos, choosing virtue over convenience became increasingly natural and automatic. My mind had developed the strength to handle whatever challenges arose. I also discovered the importance of mental recovery periods. Just as muscles need rest between intensive training sessions, I would balance demanding mental exercises with periods of gentle reflection, light reading, or simple appreciation of beauty. This prevented mental burnout while allowing the benefits of training to consolidate. The iron weights remind me that strength is never permanent. It must be maintained through consistent practice. A gladiator who stops training loses his edge quickly. A mind that stops practicing discipline becomes weak and reactive just as rapidly. I created what I called difficulty challenges, deliberately, seeking out situations that would test my mental training. I would volunteer to mediate the most complex disputes, engage with the most challenging personalities, and tackle the most overwhelming problems. Each difficult situation became a gymnasium for strengthening my character. The goal wasn't to become invulnerable. It was to become antifragile, actually growing stronger through stress and challenge rather than being weakened by them. Like bones that strengthen under pressure, a properly trained mind becomes more resilient and capable with each obstacle it overcomes. Mental training also required tracking progress and adjusting methods. I kept detailed records of my responses to challenging situations, noting where I maintained discipline and where I fell short. This allowed me to identify specific areas needing more work and adapt my training accordingly. The most important lesson was that mental strength, like physical strength, is built through thousands of small daily choices rather than occasional, dramatic efforts. The person who does mental push-ups every morning for years becomes far stronger than someone who makes heroic efforts occasionally but lacks consistent practice. Those worn iron weights represent a fundamental truth. You become what you repeatedly practice. Train your mind with the same dedication you would train for the Olympic Games, and you'll develop the unshakable discipline that can handle any challenge life presents. Asterisk, asterisk. The unfinished statue in my private courtyard stands as a constant reminder that all human endeavors remain incomplete. Yet this incompleteness doesn't diminish their value, makes them part of something larger than any individual life. This statue, meant to commemorate Roman victories, but never completed due to more pressing imperial duties, taught me the most important lesson about discipline. It's not about perfecting yourself, but about contributing to a legacy that will outlast you. When I first became emperor, I thought leadership was about solving immediate problems and managing current crises. But as the years passed, I realized that true leadership and true discipline requires thinking far beyond your own lifetime. Every decision I made would echo through generations of Romans who would never know my name. This long view transformed everything about how I approached my daily responsibilities. Instead of asking what will make me look good today, I began asking what will serve Rome best 50 years from now. Instead of choosing what was politically expedient, I chose what would build lasting strength and stability. The discipline of legacy. Thinking means accepting that you are part of a continuum, stretching from your ancestors to your descendants. You inherit the accumulated wisdom, achievements, and problems of those who came before you. Your job is to add your own contribution while preparing the foundation for those who will follow. I spent countless hours studying the reigns of previous emperors, not just to avoid their mistakes, but to understand how their decisions had shaped the empire I inherited. Augustus's constitutional reforms still guided our government structure. Trajan's military campaigns had established borders I was now defending. Hadrian's administrative systems were still organizing provincial governance. This historical perspective showed me that my individual reign was just one chapter in Rome's larger story. The policies I implemented, the precedents I set, the institutions I strengthened or weakened would determine what kind of empire future leaders would inherit. This responsibility was simultaneously humbling and inspiring. I began making decisions that would benefit Romans not yet born, even when those decisions carried personal or political costs in the present. I invested in infrastructure projects that would take decades to complete. I established legal precedents that would guide justice long after my death. I trained administrators who would serve future emperors more effectively than they served me. The plague years tested this long-term thinking severely. The immediate crisis demanded enormous resources and attention. Every instinct urged me to focus exclusively on short-term survival. But I forced myself to ask, how can we emerge from this catastrophe stronger than we entered it? This question led to reforms that strengthened Rome's public health systems, improved medical training, and created better emergency response procedures. These changes saved countless lives in future epidemics that I would never see. The immediate costs were enormous. but the long-term benefits justified every sacrifice. Legacy thinking also required accepting that I would not live to see the full fruits of my labor. The statue reminds me that most worthwhile endeavors remain unfinished when their creators die. But this incompleteness doesn't diminish their value. It makes them gifts to future generations who will build upon what we started. I planted olive groves that would not produce their best fruit for 30 years. I established schools that would educate children who would become leaders long after my death. I strengthened military traditions that would protect Romans I would never meet. Each act of legacy thinking required faith that future generations would value and preserve what I was building. The discipline of the long view also changed how I measured success. Instead of seeking immediate recognition or short-term achievements, I focused on creating lasting positive change. Would my legal reforms still be serving justice in a century? Would my military reorganization still be protecting Roman borders decades from now? Would my administrative improvements still be serving citizens efficiently long after I was forgotten? This perspective liberated me from the tyranny of contemporary opinion. Critics might attack my policies, but history would judge whether they served Rome well. Political opponents might scheme against me, but time would reveal whether my decisions strengthened or weakened the empire. The approval of future generations mattered more than the applause of current crowds. Legacy thinking required daily discipline in small decisions as well as major policies. How I treated servants would influence how future emperors viewed their responsibilities to all citizens. How I handled personal setbacks would set precedents for imperial dignity under pressure. How I balanced public duty with private life would guide future leaders facing similar challenges. I came to understand that true immortality isn't achieved through monuments or statues, but through the positive influence you have on human flourishing. That continues long after your death. The greatest emperors aren't remembered primarily for their conquests or wealth, but for the institutions, principles, and precedents they established that served humanity across generations. The unfinished statue teaches a profound lesson. Perfection isn't the goal of disciplined living. Contributing meaningfully to something larger than yourself is the goal. You don't need to complete every project or solve every problem. You need to add your chapter to humanity's ongoing story in a way that makes the next chapters more possible and more beautiful. When I look at that incomplete statue, I don't see failure, I see potential. Someday, another emperor or citizen will complete what I started, adding their own vision to mine. They will build upon the foundation I helped create, extending the work toward greater heights than I could achieve alone. This is the ultimate discipline. Living for something that transcends your individual existence, while pouring yourself completely into the work that only you can do in your brief time here. Asterisk. The timeless principles I have shared with you transcend the boundaries of empire and era because human nature remains constant across centuries. You may not rule 60 million souls, but you do rule one life, your own, and that personal empire requires the same disciplined leadership that governed Rome. Your modern challenges mirror the ones I faced as emperor, just on a different scale. Where I dealt with hostile senators, you faced difficult colleagues and demanding bosses. Where I managed military campaigns, you navigate competitive markets and professional battles. Where I handled plagues and disasters, you confront economic uncertainty and personal crises. The principles remain identical because the fundamental human struggles never change. You still must choose between short-term pleasure and long-term benefit. You still must decide whether to react emotionally or respond wisely. You still must balance personal desires against broader responsibilities. You still must find meaning and purpose in the midst of chaos and uncertainty. Your inner citadel needs the same daily construction that mine required. Every morning, you face the choice between letting external circumstances determine your emotional state or maintaining inner sovereignty, regardless of what happens around you. The commute that frustrates you, the deadline that pressures you, the relationship that challenges you, these are your training grounds for developing unshakable character. The discipline of perception applies directly to your daily experience. When your project gets rejected, you can see failure and discouragement, or you can see valuable feedback and redirection toward better opportunities. When your relationship faces difficulties, you can see personal attack and abandonment, or you can see growth opportunities and deeper understanding. The external facts remain the same. Your interpretation determines your experience. Your morning ritual becomes as crucial as mine was. Instead of immediately checking messages and letting the world's chaos invade your consciousness, you can claim the first hour for building inner strength. Gratitude practice, intention setting, principle clarification, and mental preparation, these same elements that sustained an emperor can sustain anyone facing modern pressures. The art of dealing with difficult people translates perfectly to contemporary life. Your unreasonable customer mirrors my unreasonable senator. Your manipulative colleague echoes my scheming courtier. Your demanding family member reflects my challenging political allies. The same principles apply. Maintain your center. Refuse to take their behavior personally. Focus on what you can control and respond from strength rather than react from emotion. Your personal plague years might be economic downturns, health crises, family tragedies, or career setbacks. The discipline I developed during Rome's darkest hours, maintaining clarity under pressure, making decisions with incomplete information, focusing on what you can influence while accepting what you cannot. These skills serve any crisis. The modern warrior's mind applies to competitive markets, professional challenges, and personal goals. You may not carry a sword, but you carry responsibility for your family's security, your team's success, and your community's welfare. The same mental preparation, strategic thinking, and principled action that won ancient battles can win modern ones. Your voluntary simplicity practice becomes even more important in a world designed to create endless desires and dependencies. Every advertisement tells you that happiness requires purchasing something. Every social media post suggests that contentment demands comparison with others. The discipline of needing less while contributing more becomes essential for maintaining sanity and purpose. The mental training I described works identically in contemporary contexts. Attention control helps you focus in an age of infinite distractions. Emotional regulation serves you in high-pressure meetings and challenging relationships. Perspective shifting allows you to find opportunity within setbacks and possibility within problems. Your legacy thinking shapes how you raise children, build organizations, and contribute to your community. Every interaction with others creates ripple effects that extend far beyond your visible influence. The patience you model, the integrity you demonstrate, the wisdom you share, these shaped future generations, just as my imperial decisions shaped Rome's destiny. The key insight is that external circumstances are never the real issue. Response to circumstances determines everything. You cannot control global markets, company policies, other people's choices, natural disasters, or societal changes. But you can control your preparation, your reaction, your effort, your character, and your contribution. Your personal throne room might be your office, your home, or your car during your daily commute. Wherever you make decisions that affect others, family members, team members, customers, community members, you exercise imperial power that requires imperial discipline. The purple cloak of responsibility looks different in modern times. Might be a business suit, work uniform, or simple daily clothes, but it carries the same weight. People depend on you to show up with strength, wisdom, and reliability. Your personal empire requires the same disciplined leadership that any historical empire demanded. Start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. You don't need perfect circumstances to begin practicing these principles. You need only the willingness to choose discipline over impulse, wisdom over emotion, principle over convenience, and service over selfishness. The same stoic practices that sustained me through 8 years of war, devastating plagues, political intrigue, and personal losses can sustain you through whatever challenges define your era. Human nature hasn't changed. The path to strength, peace, and effectiveness remains the same. Asterisk, asterisk. The worn stones marking my daily walking path through the palace gardens are polished smooth by years of contemplative steps. Each morning and evening walk, a sacred ritual that transformed abstract philosophy into lived wisdom. These stones represent the most practical truth I can share with you. Discipline is not achieved through occasional heroic efforts, but through small, consistent daily practices that compound. Over time, let me give you the exact framework I used to build unshakable inner strength, adapted for your modern circumstances. This is not theory, this is the practical system that sustained me through the darkest challenges any leader could face. Morning foundation, first 30 minutes of your day before checking any messages, before speaking to anyone, before letting the world's demands touch your consciousness. Claim this time for building your inner citadel. I called this imperial preparation time, and it became non-negotiable regardless of circumstances. Begin with 5 minutes of gratitude practice, but focus specifically on challenges you'll face today. Thank your mind for the opportunity to practice patience with difficult people. Appreciate the chance to demonstrate courage in uncertain situations. Express gratitude for problems that will strengthen your character through their resolution. Spend 10 minutes in what I called day design. Visualize yourself moving through the day's challenges with calm, strength, and clear thinking. See yourself responding to interruptions with grace, handling conflicts with wisdom, and making decisions from principle rather than emotion. This mental rehearsal programs your mind for disciplined responses. Before reactive patterns can take hold, use 10 minutes for principle clarification. Identify the 3 most important decisions you'll likely face today. Then clarify which values will guide those choices. Will you choose courage over comfort, justice over convenience, truth over popularity, honesty over advantage? Know your principles before pressure arrives. End with 5 minutes of perspective practice. Remind yourself that today's urgent crises will be forgotten within a year. Your reputation concerns will matter little in a decade. Your current problems are temporary training that will pass, but your character development through facing them will remain permanently. Midday. Reset 5 minutes maximum when pressure peaks. During your day, in the middle of challenging meetings, during overwhelming deadlines, or when emotions begin controlling your responses. My emperor's pause. Technique. Take 3 deliberate breaths while asking, am I responding from my highest self or my reactive patterns? Touch a physical anchor or watch a coin, a stone while reconnecting with your morning intentions. Ask yourself, what would the person I want to become do in this situation? This brief reset prevents emotional hijacking and reconnects you with disciplined choice-making. I used this technique during Senate arguments, military crises, and personal conflicts. It works because it creates space between stimulus and response, for space where character lives. Evening. Reflection 15 minutes before sleep. End each day by walking, whether through your neighborhood, your home, or simply around a single room. Physical movement helps process the day's experiences and prepares your mind for restorative sleep. During this walk, practice what I call daily archaeology. Examine the day's events, not for self-criticism, but for wisdom extraction. Where did you maintain discipline under pressure? What triggered reactive responses you want to improve? Which principles guided your best decisions? What patterns do you notice in your strongest and weakest moments? Write briefly about one insight you gained and one area for tomorrow's improvement. This isn't elaborate journaling, just a few sentences that capture learning and intention. The act of writing clarifies thinking and strengthens memory. Weekly practices for sustained growth. Weekly once weekly. Practice voluntary discomfort. Sleep on the floor, fast for a day, take cold showers, or deliberately choose the more difficult option when easier ones are available. This builds resilience and independence from external circumstances. Weekly, seek out one difficult conversation you've been avoiding or one challenging task you've been postponing. Use these as opportunities to practice courage and develop strength through controlled adversity. Monthly, review your progress using specific metrics. Are you responding to criticism with less defensiveness? Handling setbacks with more equanimity? Making decisions more consistently from principle? Focus on behavioral changes, not just internal feelings. The non-negotiable foundation, this system works only with absolute consistency. Missing one day doesn't break the practice, but it weakens the foundation. Missing multiple days returns you to reactive patterns and scattered thinking. Protect your morning time as fiercely as you would protect your children's safety. Schedule around it. Wake earlier if necessary, and refuse to compromise it for anything less than genuine emergencies. This investment of 30 minutes creates hours of increased effectiveness throughout your day. Start small if this seems overwhelming. Begin with just 10 minutes of morning practice and 5 minutes of evening reflection. Build the habit of consistency before expanding duration. A brief practice maintained daily is infinitely more valuable than an elaborate system used sporadically. Remember that you're not trying to become perfect. You're building strength through practice. Some days you'll handle challenges brilliantly. Others, you'll fall short of your ideals. Both outcomes provide valuable training data for continued growth. The worn stones on my walking path remind me that transformation happens through repetition, not revelation. Each day's practice adds another layer of strength. Each consistent choice builds more solid character. Each moment of chosen discipline, rather than automatic reaction, develops greater freedom. Your path will be different from mine, but the principles remain constant. Create your own walking route, your own morning ritual, your own evening reflection practice. Adapt the framework to fit your circumstances, but maintain the underlying commitment to daily character development. This is how emperors are made, not through crowns or titles, but through the disciplined cultivation of inner strength that serves something greater than personal comfort. Your empire awaits your leadership. Asterisk, asterisk, the final entry in my personal journal sits before me, written with the knowledge that death approaches, but wisdom endures. These may be among the last words I share with you, so let them carry the weight of everything I have learned about the discipline that transcends death itself. I have ruled an empire, led armies, survived plagues, and faced every challenge that tests human character. But the greatest discovery of my reign was this: the discipline that matters most isn't the kind that controls others, it's the kind that liberates yourself. True power lies not in commanding legions, but in commanding your own mind, heart, and choices. The purple cloak will pass to another emperor. The palace will house different rulers. The empire itself will one day crumble into dust. But the principles I have shared with youth, the disciplines of perception, emotion, duty, and virtue, these are eternal. They worked before I was born. They sustained me through my reign, and they will guide humanity long after Rome is forgotten. You inherit this wisdom not as subjects of my empire, but as fellow travelers on the path toward human flourishing. The same capacity for strength, wisdom, and nobility that any emperor possessed lives within you. The only difference is that your kingdom is internal, your battles are personal, and your legacy is the influence you have on hearts and minds you touch. Remember that discipline is not about perfection, it's about direction. I made countless mistakes during my reign, chose poorly in countless situations, and fell short of my own ideals more times than I can count. But each failure became training for better choices. Each mistake became wisdom for future decisions. Each shortcoming became motivation for continued growth. The work is never finished. There is no graduation from the school of character development, no moment when you can stop practicing virtue and rest on your accomplishments. Every day presents new opportunities to choose courage over comfort, truth over convenience, service over selfishness. Every moment offers another chance to respond from your highest self, rather than your reactive patterns. This is both the burden and the beauty of conscious living. You must choose, repeatedly and deliberately, who you want to be. No one else can make these choices for you. No external authority can force virtue upon you. No circumstances can create character for you. The work belongs entirely to you, and that is what makes it sacred. Pass this torch to others through your example more than your words. When people see you maintaining calm under pressure, choosing principle over profit, treating all persons with dignity regardless of their status, and finding meaning in service rather than self-advancement, they will ask how such strength is possible. That is when you share what you have learned. The greatest gift you can give the world is your own transformation into the person you were meant to become. Every moment you choose discipline over impulse, wisdom over emotion, love over fear. Make it easier for others to make similar choices. Your character becomes a light that guides others toward their own best selves. Do not wait for perfect circumstances to begin practicing these principles. Do not postpone virtue until you feel completely prepared. Do not delay character development until external conditions become favorable. Start where you are, with what you have, in the situation you currently face. The present moment is the only classroom where transformation actually occurs. And when your own final hour approaches, when your body fails and your earthly influence ends, you will know that you lived with purpose and died with dignity. The discipline that seemed difficult during comfortable times will prove to be your greatest treasure during your deepest need. The stone path worn smooth by my contemplative walks will outlast my footsteps. Other rulers will walk these gardens. Other thinkers will seek wisdom in these chambers. Other souls will struggle with the same fundamental questions that shaped my reign. But the principles remain. Virtue is the only true good. Character is the only lasting wealth. And service is the only meaningful legacy. Take up this ancient discipline. Make it your own. Adapt it to your circumstances, your challenges, your particular calling in this brief human journey. But do not let it die with me. Pass it forward, refined by your own experience and strengthened by your own commitment. The empire of the soul knows no boundaries of time or space. Join this eternal kingdom of those who choose wisdom over folly, courage over cowardice, love over hatred, hope over despair. Your crown will be invisible, your throne will be internal, but your reign will influence eternity. This is my final gift to you, the knowledge that you possess within yourself. Everything necessary to live with unshakable strength, unassailable peace, and unquestionable purpose. The discipline every emperor mastered awaits your mastery. Go now and rule well the only empire that truly belongs to you.